Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is the making of the solemn affirmation by our new member. I now invite our new member, Cara Hilton, to make the solemn affirmation.
Would you please repeat after me? I, Cara Laura Hilton.
I, Cara Laura Hilton.
Do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm.
Do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm.
That I will be faithful and bear true allegiance.
That I will be faithful and bear true allegiance.
To Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, her heirs and successors, according to law.
To Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, her heirs and successors, according to law.
The next item of business is portfolio questions. Question number 1 is Jean Urquhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to review the document retention policies of all public bodies in the criminal justice system.
Minister Rosanna Cunningham.
The Public Records Scotland Act 2011 promotes efficient and accountable record-keeping by Scottish public authorities. The Act requires each body to prepare and implement a records management plan which must set out proper arrangements for the management, archiving and disposal of its records. Each plan must be submitted to the Keeper of the Records of Scotland for assessment and agreement. The Keeper has published on the National Archives website a timetable by which named bodies must submit their plans. The website also includes the Keeper's assessment of those plans submitted to date. Scottish ministers have no separate proposals to review the document retention or disposal policies of criminal justice bodies.
Jean Urquhart.
I thank the Minister for her reply, and it was very useful. What advice would you give to an individual whose ability to challenge decisions made by the criminal justice system has been hampered by an unclear document retention policy, which means that the documents most vital to him are no longer available?
Minister.
Document retention and disposal policies are operational matters for each of the public bodies that might be involved. They have to take account of relevant statutory provisions, for example, under data protection legislation. And it is obviously important that bodies within the criminal justice system do have in place robust arrangements for the retention, destruction or disposal of relevant public records that they hold. And under the Public Records Scotland Act 2011, as I've just indicated, there must be a plan that includes details of their document retention and disposal policies, and I'm sure the member will want to go and have a look at the relevant plan in respect of the case that she's raising. But obviously the circumstances of any individual case within the criminal justice system is a matter for that relevant justice organisation within their independent powers or for the courts. It's very difficult for me to answer when I don't know or understand any of the background to this, and I would invite the member to be in direct contact with me, and I may be able to help her further.
Thank you. Question number 2, Stewart Stevenson.
To ask the Scottish Government what benefits Her Majesty's Prison Grampian will bring to the North East.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny MacAskill.
HM Prison Grampian will be Scotland's first community-facing prison that can accommodate men, women and young people from the North East of Scotland. Providing the ability to maintain close links with families and communities is intended to help offenders desist from offending and better reintegrate with their communities in the North East and elsewhere on release. The North East community will benefit by an additional 40 jobs, which will bring commensurate economic benefit to the local community. And there will also be an improvement to the visual image of the area, an increase in local work placements where there is a need, an overall reduction in travel time to courts and a reduced carbon usage.
Stewart Stevenson.
I very much welcome the Cabinet Secretary's comments, but given that the primary objectives of a prison are community safety and the reform of convicts, does the Cabinet Secretary agree that the previous success of Peterhead Prison's Specialist Sex Offenders Unit is an excellent base upon which Grampian can build?
Cabinet Secretary.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. There was an outstanding expertise there. Indeed, I have come just recently from, indeed this morning, from the Prison Officers Association conference in Peebles, where indeed it was being commemorated and officers from that prison were present. So there is that expertise. That is expertise that will be used, shared across the prison estate, but I would put on record the outstanding expertise built up by those officers in Peterhead, and I think we should all express our gratitude to them. But I can give the member an assurance that it is now a skill that will be shared across the prison estate.
Graham Pearson, supplementary.
Presiding Officer, thanks very much. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that the population within our prisons is rising, and the Government's own forecast would estimate 9,500 prisoners will be incarcerated in the coming years. Is it his intentions to plan to build further prisons?
Well, it should be specifically about HMP Grampian and the North East, but I invite the Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we do have a prison replacement programme. Clearly, matters are underway in HM Prison Inverclyde to replace Greenock, in a new prison for the Highlands to replace Inverness, and of course the replacement that will be necessary for HM Prison Barlinnie. It is our view that we currently have capacity that's accepted by the Scottish Prison Service, but as I was saying, as I was mentioning to Stewart Stevenson earlier, speaking at the Prison Officers Conference, we do recognise that building new prisons is not simply for the benefits of inmates who do have to be rehabilitated and reformed. There are also benefits there for people who have to work with them, not simply in their safety but also in their comfort, and on that basis we have a prison building programme that will proceed.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I remind members that supplementaries must be in line with the original question. Question number 3, Joan McAlpine.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what benefits, to ask the Scottish Government what recent progress it has made in reducing the number of fire deaths in Scotland.
Rosanna Cunningham.
Scottish statistics show that in 2012-13 the provisional figure for fatal fire casualties was 46, a drop of 23% compared to the previous year, and this is the joint lowest figure over 10 years. Overall, there were 26,613 fires in Scotland in 2012-13, the lowest in the last decade. While we know that statistics based on small numbers can fluctuate over time, there is a positive downward trend, and that is undoubtedly testament to the hard work of the fire and rescue services and their partners in Scotland and their continued focus on prevention, making Scotland a safer place to live.
Joan McAlpine.
Minister for her answer, and I welcome the figures that she reveals. I hope the new single service focus on frontline activity will help continue these trends. Does the Minister believe that fire investigation dogs have a role to play in further freeing up resources, uncovering and indeed preventing deliberate fire raising?
Minister.
I'm sure that the use of fire investigation dogs is something that the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service will want to consider, and I would invite the member to liaise directly with the service about the potential for fire investigation dogs. I have, as I recall, I think, met one of the dogs in question, and I think most people would be very impressed by their activities.
Thank you. Question number 4 by Patricia Ferguson has not been lodged for understandable reasons. Question number 5, Mary Scanlon, has been withdrawn also for understandable reasons. So I now come to question number 6, Margot MacDonald.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on Police Scotland's reported decision to ask the City of Edinburgh Council to grant licences for saunas only on the condition that items of a sexual nature are not allowed in the premises.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny MacAskill.
Under the terms of the Civic Government Scotland Act 1982, any individual or body may make representations concerning the granting of a public entertainment licence. Representations made by individual bodies, such as Police Scotland, are operational matters which the Scottish Government would not intervene in.
Margot MacDonald.
I thank the Minister for his reply, but I'm a bit puzzled since the Scottish Government promotes the safer sex message, and it would seem a very odd contradiction to have the saunas to be asked to not have any condoms in them. And so I would wonder where that sort of policy is made. Is that an operational matter, or is that overridden by the Government's greater task of looking for a safer sex and lower transmission of infectious diseases, which we know are on the rise? Another reason why this was a mysterious instruction. And while I'm at it, the saunas that were visited and inspected included gay saunas. Why was that? Does the Minister know?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think these are two matters here. First of all, these are operational matters and we wouldn't seek to intervene, but obviously there is a subcommittee here and Ms MacDonald is understandably able to make representations there. But on the matter relating to condoms and other aspects, let's be quite clear. Police Scotland have said that their recommendation was not just misinterpreted but misrepresented by the press, and they were not proposing to ban condoms. Police Scotland, I think it's important, issued the following statement, and I quote, "At no point do the recommendations make reference to the banning of condoms. Police Scotland absolutely supports proper measures to protect sexual health." End quote. More generally, the Scottish Government is in favour of a harm reduction approach to sexual health. Evidence does suggest that banning items such as condoms can have a detrimental effect on public health. So I think Ms MacDonald is right that if there were in fact a position taken on there, then it would be contrary to the Government's intention on public health. But that is not the position of Police Scotland. Equally, it is most certainly the position of Police Scotland that where matters of criminality come to their attention, it is important that they should act. And on that basis, this Government has full support for Police Scotland.
Supplementary, Sandra White.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. On the nature of the saunas being private businesses, can the Cabinet Secretary tell me if he will raise the issue of the free condoms being provided to these private businesses, and will that cost be met from Edinburgh Council taxpayers?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, these are fundamentally matters for the City of Edinburgh Council, and they will require to consider matters as they have before. Obviously, Police Scotland is operationally independent, but I thought it was important that we should put on record that they have been not just misinterpreted but misrepresented. But certainly I have no doubt that Ms White and indeed myself can make representations individually to the City of Edinburgh Council Group.
Thank you. Question number 7, Sandra White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has for the Cashback for Communities scheme.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny MacAskill.
I'm delighted to say that when I was out last week seeing the work of the excellent cashback schools of rugby at Wallace High School in Stirling, I had the great pleasure of announcing a further £24 million investment which will be used to further expand this Government's hugely successful Cashback for Communities programme for a further 3 years. This latest commitment to invest in our young people and our communities heralds a landmark £74 million of criminals' money seized and put back into communities across Scotland since 2008.
Sandra White.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response. Can the Cabinet Secretary detail what projects have been funded by the cashback scheme in my Kelvin constituency?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, there are a whole variety of matters, and indeed before I went to Peebles to the Prison Officers Association conference, I was indeed at a matter with SPFL Music Box programme where we had the first contribution from the Fender Guitar Foundation, one of which in this country, one of which guitars will go to Partick Thistle Community Trust Music Box at Firhill, and no doubt many of Ms White's constituents will be able to enjoy that. Projects in the Glasgow area as a whole have received over £4.5 million of cashback investment, benefiting over 122,000 young people. A whole variety of projects in Glasgow Kelvin and Glasgow's West End, Boys Brigade, Partick Boxing Club, Schools of Rugby, Scottish Sports Futures, Youth Link Scotland and Basketball Scotland. The SFA runs 2 cashback-funded programmes at Partick Thistle. There's a whole variety of matters as well as small grants, and I'm sure that the area is much better for it.
Supplementary, Duncan McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary remind us when we will finally receive the evaluation of the cashback scheme, which I and many others have raised concerns about in terms of its outcome and the meeting of its objective? When can we get this evaluation before the Parliament?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, these matters are ongoing and will be built upon. Equally, what I can say is whether it was with the SRU, and I was grateful to Claire Adamson for hosting a reception for Scottish Rugby Union. They were very grateful for the contribution of cashback. The SPFL and the SFA were equally grateful for the contribution of cashback. I know that Mr McNeill doesn't like to put a damper on matters, but I think he should realise that many communities and very many young people, including including the youngsters today getting an opportunity to meet with stars from various bands who had turned up to give their time, as well as benefiting from Fender guitars. The first such Fender guitars to be given out with the North American continent are in fact a testimony to the outstanding work and success of the Cashback for Communities scheme.
Further supplementary, Joan McAlpine.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Is the Cabinet Secretary aware of the recent cashback grant for a young people's chill-out area at the Dumfries Multicultural Centre? And would he be willing to visit the young people at the centre once the new facility is up and running? Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm happy to try and do so. I have seen some outstanding work with Cashback for Communities in Dumfries town itself and also in Dumfriesshire further, whether Annan Athletic or elsewhere. So I'm more than happy to try and catch up with these matters. It was a pleasure to be at Easter Road Stadium, and it would be a delight to be able to attend at Dumfries in the future.
Question number 8, Patrick Harvie.
Thank you. Can I ask the Government what safeguards are in place to regulate the undercover policing of non-violent political protest and what the extent of such activity is in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary Kenny MacAskill.
The use and conduct of undercover police officers is covered by the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Scotland Act 2000. The decision to authorise undercover police officers is an operational matter for the Police Service of Scotland. The member may be interested to learn that the Scottish Government will shortly publish a draft order which will include enhanced arrangements for the regime for Police Service of Scotland authorisations of undercover officers. This will put on a statutory footing the recommendations made by an independent report by HMIC for England and Wales. The report followed on from the extensive media coverage of a Metropolitan Police officer's long-term undercover deployment.
Patrick Harvie.
Thank you. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the answer. And while some of the recent revelations, the most disturbing of which did take place south of the border in England and Wales, we do need to make sure that we're learning the lessons of that here in Scotland. Allegations of officers having sexual relationships and even beginning families with their targets under the guise of undercover policing. Can the Cabinet Secretary give us an assurance that Scottish police officers have not, are not and will not be permitted to engage in sexual relationships with their targets while acting as undercover officers?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, what I can give an assurance is that when we recognise good practice, then we will adopt it here, and that's why the report by HMIC for England and Wales is going to be put onto statutory footing here. I'm not aware of any such matters that occurred south of the border that raised legitimate concerns and worries, and indeed were the precursor for the investigation by HMIC, England and Wales, ever having happened here. But I can give the member, I think, 3 points. 1, we're not aware of these matters ever having happened here. 2, we always keep up to date, and when there's good practice, whether for south of the border, we take that on board here. And 3, I can say from my own evidence that all my experience with undercover officers is that they are remarkably brave, having seen investigations into Yardie gangs where officers from south of the border came up and put themselves at some difficulty and danger to address these matters here in the city of Edinburgh, where I've met officers in south-west of Scotland involved in infiltration into IRA-related gangs. I think we owe a great deal of gratitude to these officers. It is very hard, it is very difficult, they are remarkably brave, but I can give you an assurance that we monitor these matters and we will ensure that there will be no tarnishing of their outstanding service.
Question number 9, Colin Beattie.
To ask the Scottish Government when it will implement its plans to abolish corroboration in criminal cases.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny MacAskill.
The Criminal Justice Scotland Bill proposes to remove the general requirement for corroboration in criminal cases. It will still be necessary to prove cases beyond reasonable doubt, and corroborative supporting evidence will still be sought and used. The bill is still being considered by Parliament. A final decision on commencement will be taken in close consultation with key justice stakeholders, although current planning is for the provision to be commenced in 2015.
Colin Beattie.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response. I would also ask the Cabinet Secretary, why does the Scottish Government consider it important to abolish this requirement now?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we are building upon the report of the Lord Justice Clerk, Lord Carloway. We built upon his report by carrying out a further investigation into safeguards, and we're conscious that his is a fulsome investigation into evidence and procedure in Scotland. No other criminal justice system in Western Europe or the Commonwealth operates a general requirement for corroboration. Justice, we believe, is not being done. It is archaic, as the Lord Justice Clerk has said, and it is time to make sure that we deliver on what will be his significant reforms to improve justice and make Scotland a safer place.
A very brief supplementary, Margaret Mitchell.
Will the Cabinet Secretary at least look at ways of reforming the law of evidence to ensure that the criminal justice system is balanced and fair for both the accused of crime and victims of crime, while retaining the important safeguard of corroboration?
And as brief as possible an answer, Cabinet Secretary.
We're happy to take on board any safeguards. We have taken on board safeguards suggested and agreed to by the High Court of Justiciary, but if Ms Mitchell wishes to make further suggestions, we'll be happy to look at them.
Many thanks. And we now turn to questions on rural affairs and the environment. Question number 1 by Michael McMahon was not lodged and an explanation was provided. So I turn to question number 2, Annabelle Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on common agricultural policy funding to be made available in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead.
For several weeks, we have been pressing the UK Government for a resolution on this urgent matter, given there are around €4 billion of European funding that we're talking about for the whole of the UK, and we have presented very strong arguments that are supported across this chamber on why Scotland should receive a fairer allocation of the overall funding, and also why the full cap convergence uplift that the UK will receive should come to Scotland. So the ball is now firmly in the Secretary of State's court in Whitehall to do the right thing for Scotland's industry, and I hope we will receive some positive news soon.
Annabelle Ewing.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer, and I also, of course, very much support the case for the uplift to come to Scotland. But can the Cabinet Secretary confirm how much was lost to agriculture in Scotland in the most recent CAP negotiations as a result of our lack of a seat at the top table as an independent EU member state in our own right?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as the member will be aware, under the current cap that's just been negotiated for 2014 to 2020, a new funding formula was agreed to close the gap between those countries that get the poorer payments per hectare with those that get the higher payments. Had Scotland been a member state, we estimate we would have qualified for an extra €1 billion coming to Scotland under that formula, given that we are currently third bottom of the league. Although under the new arrangements, it looks like we're now going to be bottom of the league, thanks to the UK's poor negotiations and not prioritising Scotland's interests. So that is just the direct payments in terms of Pillar 1. There's another pillar called Pillar 2, which is rural development funding, and also it looks like we're now bottom of that league as well, and the other countries negotiated an uplift in their rural development funds, and the UK did not do that for Scotland.
Thank you. A supplementary, Claire Baker.
Presiding Officer, but the situation isn't about Scotland being an independent member state. It's about Scotland having to negotiate a position within the EU, and the Cabinet Secretary can't give any guarantees to Scottish farmers about what the funding would look like at the end of any negotiations. But what we're dealing with today is an imminent decision which will be in place until 2020. The Cabinet Secretary has been supportive of a significant transfer from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2. Is that position dependent on Scotland receiving the full uplift?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, what I have said, including in this debate in Parliament just a couple of weeks ago, is that clearly, as we take our decisions going forward, including the extent to which we transfer from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2, that will be influenced by the size of the overall budget, because clearly the smaller the budget we have, the more difficult decisions we're going to have to take. And I'm sure that the member, Claire Baker, just asked the question, will also be asking for decent funding towards environment schemes and other schemes under Pillar 2, rural development. And we simply do not have the budget to satisfy all these demands because of the poor negotiation that the UK Government delivered for Scotland. In terms of the negotiations of Scotland being in Europe as an independent country, I don't think there's anyone who seriously thinks that Scotland will not be permitted entry to the European Union. And in terms of the cap budget's payments will continue, of course, because the budget's in place already from 2014 to 2020, and given that an independent Scotland would be a net contributor to that budget, it's absolutely ludicrous to suggest in any forum that Scotland would be denied their farming payments under independence.
And a further supplementary, Alex Ferguson.
Of course, thank you, Presiding Officer. It's not, of course, a question of Scotland being a full member of the EU. It's a question of what terms and conditions it became a member under, and indeed when. But I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary would agree in his more charitable moments that we are where we are in terms of CAP funding per hectare, largely because we opted unanimously to have a historic-based system at the time of the last reform. I support, as he knows, internal and external convergence, and these are things that can be negotiated as we move forward. But the big decisions have been taken and signed up to in Europe, and the clock is ticking. So would he now start the consultation, indeed kickstart the consultation on the options for the implementation of CAP reform? That is his gift to do, so that Scotland's farmers can now begin to plan ahead, something they badly need to do.
Can I say to the member, of course, we're going to consult with the industry on the new Common Agricultural Policy, and we will stick to our schedule of consulting on the Rural Development Programme, the Pillar 2 funding in November, and the Pillar 1 funding, the direct single farm payments, or the new area payments in December, and we'll stick to that schedule. In terms of how the budgets were calculated, can I just say to the member, if you look at the results that other member states achieved within Europe, within these negotiations, it's not down to historic reasons, it's down to the lack of willingness for the UK Government to negotiate on behalf of Scotland's farmers. And that is what determined the pitiful low budgets that we have both under Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, amounting to billions of euros that are going to be lost to Scotland's rural businesses and rural farms as a result of that poor negotiation. That is the facts and the hard reality of the poor deal delivered for Scotland being part of the UK.
Question number 3, Annabel Goldie, has been withdrawn and an explanation has been provided. So I turn to question number 4, Hanzala Malik.
Thank you and good afternoon, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how the received report on the carbon disclosure project on the climate performance of FTSE 350 companies impacts on Scotland.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
The report considers FTSE 350 companies and takes a UK-wide focus. The principal recommendations, including the 5-point plan, are a sensible approach, and the Scottish Government recognises the significant impact that action and leadership by these leading companies will have on both their own and their supply chain's resource efficiency, as well as on their greenhouse gas emission reductions. To this end, I also welcome the involvement and valuable contribution made by Scotland's 2020 Climate Group at the International Climate Justice Conference and Climate Leaders Workshop earlier this month.
Hanzala Malik.
Thank you very much for that response, Cabinet Secretary. Please, given that the importance Scottish companies such as the Wood Group and Clear Energy scored badly as they failed to disclose information or respond at all, how can the Scottish Government persuade Scottish companies to take a more monitoring and reduction of climate pollution seriously? Minister.
Well, I think these are important issues. What we are doing is working through the 2020 Climate Group, which does, I'm not sure Hanzala Malik probably knows this, but just to put on the record, they do include a number of key companies such as Diageo, Tesco, Lloyds Banking Group, Stagecoach, SSE, BT and many others. And by using that forum to discuss what business interests are, what the value of taking part in initiatives to support climate change reduction and also to improve reporting, we can set an example in terms of have companies setting an example to their peers of how they go about it and the business advantages of engaging in this agenda and addressing their performance. So hopefully positive peer pressure from other companies in the FTSE and 350, FTSE 100 companies as well will apply some pressure to companies that are not currently maybe doing as much as we would like them to do and to bring them on board.
Supplementary, Jamie McGregor.
Thank you. Will the Minister confirm how the Scottish Government is promoting long-term investments against climate change amongst the Scottish businesses? And what will he do to make sure that Scottish businesses can implement the 5 recommendations presented by the Carbon Disclosure Project? Minister.
Well, in terms of what we're doing, I touched on it with Hanzala Malik. We are providing support to the 2020 Climate Group. It's a very important group. It involves some very high-level senior figures in business who are able to use their business experience to explain to other people in the business community about why they should be doing this, what the advantages are to business of engaging in this agenda. There are many, as I'm sure the member knows, many positive economic opportunities that come from addressing such issues. And we are trying to work with them in various areas, such as through zero waste plan, trying to engage business in that as well. So there's a large number of practical issues. I should also say the Climate Group have identified 13 priorities themselves for 2013 and are trying to promote that to as many businesses as possible. So they are showing leadership themselves, and I very much welcome that. But of course I will look at the detail of any reports and see if there's any way in which we can finesse our approach to tackling business involvement in greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you. Question number 5, James Kelly.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how much Scottish farmers trade with the rest of the UK and how this compares with the rest of the world.
Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead.
It's estimated that Scotland exported approximately £400 million of crop, animal and hunting-related products to the rest of the UK and approximately £75 million to the rest of the world in 2011. However, our primary production sector, of course, supports both Scotland's food and drink exports and indeed the overall performance of the food and drink sector's growth in this country, with £5.4 billion worth of food and drink exports in 2012. And we hope to build on this success and meet the ambitious targets we have set of exports reaching £7.1 billion by 2017.
James Kelly.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Bearing in mind that in terms of farming products, Scotland trades twice as much with the UK as they do with the rest of the world, and 4 times as much as the UK compared with the EU. Why would we want to leave such a market, particularly bearing in mind we have 63 million customers that we're trading with?
Cabinet Secretary.
I really regret the member's scaremongering and his attempts to sow doubt and uncertainty. And if that's the sort of politics he wants to conduct, fair enough. We will come back with our positive case for independence and he can stick to his negative politics. But can I say that Ireland, for instance, small country not far from here, export roughly the same per head of population to England and the rest of the UK as what we do. And therefore, they don't seem to have encountered any problems by being a successful country and exporting to those markets. And why on earth would Scotland? Of course, the benefits for Scotland are perhaps illustrated in the previous question I answered, and that we'll be able to negotiate a much better funding package for our farmers, our crofters and rural communities as an independent member of the European Union. And that would bring great benefits. I have to say that the biggest threat to access to markets elsewhere comes from the Tory government's threat of an EU referendum. And if Scotland was taken by the UK out of the EU, that would be the biggest threat to Scotland's food and drink sector.
Briefly, Angus MacDonald.
Thank you. Can the Cabinet Secretary give the Chamber an update on the repatriation of the £1.4 million red meat levy currently paid by Scottish livestock producers south of the border?
That's another good question, and again it helps answer the previous question from James Kelly, in that another benefit of independence would be the levy raised by the livestock sector here in Scotland would stay in Scotland to promote Scottish livestock produce. And unfortunately, the current UK Government are making no progress in returning what is rightfully Scotland's levy paid by Scottish livestock producers, which unfortunately has been used to promote produce from the rest of the UK, not from here from Scotland. So I can just unfortunately inform the member that very little progress has been made with the UK Government.
Question number 6 from Dave Thompson has not been lodged for understandable reasons. Therefore, I call question number 7, Gordon MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it will conclude its review of the local air quality management system.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
We received around 150 responses to the consultation exercise, which was undertaken to inform the review. The consultation finished on 20th of September, and these responses are currently being analysed. We will publish our conclusions as soon as possible following completion of this analysis, and this is likely to be early in the new year.
Gordon MacDonald.
I thank the Minister for that response. The west of Edinburgh has 4 main arterial routes into the city centre for commuters, 3 of which, Gorgie Road, Glasgow Road and Queensferry Road, continue to exceed the annual nitrogen dioxide air quality standard. The South East of Scotland Structure Plan highlights the need to provide additional housing both in the west of the city and West Lothian, all within commutable distance of the centre of Edinburgh. Is the Minister concerned that the proposal to build a substantial number of homes to the west of the city will further exacerbate the current air quality issues?
Minister.
Firstly, Presiding Officer, can I, just in relation to the point that Gordon MacDonald has raised, declare an interest, as I myself acted as an advisor to a number of developers in the west of Edinburgh prior to my election as an MSP in respect of education impacts. So if I just put that on the record, as per my register of interest. The Strategic Development Plan for the South East Scotland, approved by Scottish ministers in June 2013, makes strategic housing land allocations that do require to be reflected in local development plans. Now, planning applications for housing development proposals require to be determined in the normal way by planning authorities, taking into account all material considerations such as air quality and the ability of development proposals to promote the use of sustainable transport. And I hope that answer helps the member.
Question number 8, Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding
Sir, to ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to promote the reduction of food waste.
Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead.
Food waste is a global challenge, with 1.3 billion tonnes per year wasted, a third of the food produced. And government, individuals and businesses all, of course, have responsibilities to address this. We are already working with retailers and major brands to use their influence to cut waste in households and supply chains. And last year's National Food Waste Prevention campaign combined awareness raising with practical tips on how to reduce waste at home. We will reinforce those messages in a follow-up campaign in the new year and encourage more food waste recycling in the 1.2 million households that now have a separate food waste collection service, following our investment of almost £20 million through the Zero Waste programme over the past 3 years.
Bill Kidd.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply. Can I ask whether, in the light of the recent reports that supermarket chains can scrap up to 70% of salad products and 50% of bakery produce at a time when some of my constituents in Glasgow Anniesland are having to attend food banks, has he any talks planned with supermarket management to find a way of avoiding this astonishing level of waste? Cabinet Secretary.
I'm actually due to meet the Retailers Forum that was set up by the Scottish Government, and given the member's question today, I'll make a point of raising that with the supermarket representatives when I meet them very, very shortly. In terms of the pretty scandalous figures that the member mentions, whilst I do recognise that many retailers at the moment are actually conducting food collections, which are going to good causes, significant food collections, and we should recognise that, they could perhaps do a lot more to look at their own practices, their own pricing mechanisms and their own arrangements within each retail store, which does lead to a lot of food waste. And we all know, for instance, the impact of 2-for-1 deals and particular goods, etc. So there's a lot more the retailers could do to cut down food waste in our society, and I ask them to live up to their responsibilities to do that.
A brief supplementary and a brief answer, please, Claudia Beamish.
Thank you very much. Considering the fact that household waste in Scotland has reached 2.77 million tonnes in 2010, what's the Scottish Government doing more specifically, if the Cabinet Secretary could tell us, to raise awareness of the environmental problems caused by household waste, and what measures are being taken to encourage a culture change by Scottish Government? Cabinet Secretary.
Very good questions, and as I illustrated in my previous answer, we have moved from a position where only a few years ago very few homes in Scotland were getting food waste collections, to now 1.2 million households in Scotland having a separate food waste collections. So I do hope that helps connect with every householder in Scotland who are now putting their food waste out for collection, who weren't previously doing that, and that will hopefully help change our culture and appreciation of the cost, both financially and environmentally, of food waste.
Question number 9, John Wilson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what progress has been made with the cross-party approach to securing the full Common Agricultural Policy convergence uplift for Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead.
Well, as the member knows, this is a very important and serious issue for Scotland's agriculture and rural sector, and I was pleased that colleagues from across the Chamber were willing to jointly write to the UK Secretary of State, setting out the unassailable argument for the external convergence money to come to Scotland. I do believe that demonstrates overwhelming support of the Parliament for that, and I hope the Secretary of State, Owen Paterson, will recognise that and do the right thing for Scotland's farmers and rural communities.
John Wilson.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response. The UK Government must acknowledge that the only fair outcome on the external convergence uplift funding is for it to come to Scotland. The only part of the UK to be below the European Union threshold, thanks to the UK Government failing to seek a fair share of the budget for Scotland. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell me how much the convergence uplift will be worth to Scotland over the budget period?
Cabinet Secretary.
In our estimation, the uplift that the UK will receive, only because Scotland is currently part of the UK, and that's why the UK qualifies for the uplift, that would amount to around €220 million between now and 2019 under our latest estimates. So, therefore, given the UK is only receiving that uplift because of Scotland, we believe, as indeed does the whole Chamber, I understand, that 100% of that uplift should come to Scotland.
And extremely brief, question number 10, Claire Adamson.
Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what progress has been made regarding payments to new entrants and others who are currently excluded from the single farm payment scheme.
Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead.
Well, I am pleased to confirm that the first instalment of almost £900,000 has been paid to around 600 farmers who had their applications for support approved by the Joint Industry Government Working Group. Of course, we're now in the process of clarifying some information about a further 50 applications, and there will be a further payment, of course, next year as well.
Brief supplementary, Claire Adamson.
The exchange rate to be used for the 2013 Single Farm Payment Scheme. Can you indicate what effect the financial discipline activation will have on new entrants and the 16,000 Scottish farmers who receive their single farm payments in sterling?
And Cabinet Secretary, as briefly as possible.
Due to the financial discipline, if it's the same subject I understand the member is referring to, that's being imposed by the European Commission, there will be a small percentage decrease of single farm payments in the coming year as a result of that. Thankfully, due to negotiations, it's a much smaller decrease in single farm payments than was expected. However, it's such a small decrease that we have to just put it into perspective, and that single farm payments will be roughly the same as what they have been in previous years. So hopefully the financial impact will not be too great.
Thank you very much. That then brings us to